Hello and welcome to the session on the death of the architect. This is actually the final session, as befits the death anyway, the final session of 12 in this series towards the theory of AI. I should say that if you're interested in finding out looking at the previous ones, if you look on the panel here, this YouTube channel here has all the details of the previous ones, all the recordings of the previous ones. They're also recorded on Bilibili. I'm delighted today to be able to welcome Costa Tzidis, someone who has been a colleague and a friend for some time, and someone who is, I think, I would call him a godfather in the field, in a fairly new field. He has taught all over the place, primarily for some time at Harvard GSD, and now he's in Tongji University in Shanghai in the Design Innovation Department. And Tongji, of course, is one of the leaders in the field. In architectural terms, it's just been voted number 13 in the world, and it's also the home where we first started at Digital Futures. So welcome, Costas. Today, then, I also want to mention just briefly what we have this summer, which is a very new project. I mentioned before the possibility that we were thinking. Well, I mentioned how we were conceiving of this particular platform where we are sharing ideas among multiple doctoral students from multiple institutions as being a prototype towards what Philip Johanna and I have been talking about. And here it is. We actually have in the summer something called the Digital Consortium, where we have a doctoral platform for many institutions. The idea is that the notion in the past of having one professor in one classroom talking to one group of students doesn't make sense anymore once you have a global platform and we can bring everyone together. So the next step then is this kind of, in terms of developing this, is this series of sessions in the summer, 3 of which I'm organizing and 3 of which Philip Jan's organizing from the 12th to the 24th of June. Philip Jan's will be on performative architecture, mine will be on architecture and philosophy. And then we move into the summer workshops, which will be very similar to last year's Digital Futures World workshops, except there will be some hybrid ones where fabrication will take place in Shanghai and we'll be designing elsewhere, but most will be online. And then there'll also be a kind of concurrent international conference which will stretch over the whole of that period. And this has been titled Inclusive Futures. It's inclusive because not only are we making this completely free and available for everyone, but we want to reach out to even the most marginalized societies, most marginalized architectural communities. And one of the kind of the key issues here is in the conference is the call for papers. And the details are also on our Digital Futures World link. The call for papers, this conference is entirely free. This is, we want to make it free so those from communities where they can't afford the kind of fees that some conferences charge will be able to join. And the rating it's been published by Springer. The research rating of the publication is going to be actually higher than most conferences, most of the well-known conferences, without even giving any names. So there's that there. The conference, the deadline is the 15th of April. It's coming up soon, but please make the most of this. This is a great opportunity for scholars around the world. And please pass this on to other colleagues who might be interested in publishing papers. So today, then, this is the final session in this what's been quite a journey. And I don't want to necessarily echo what I've said before, what we said before. I'll simply say that there have been some very, very productive discussions over the course of the last 12 weeks. But I want to kind of, in some ways, bring them together in a way and also point towards the necessary consequence of what I take this to be. That is to say, the death of the architect. And just to say, we've already looked in the past few weeks at how generative AI, how effective it can be. This is the work of Stylegans looking at faces. We've also seen how this is the work of Wan Yu He of XCool, how we can hallucinate buildings that do not yet exist. These are all quite possible. we've also seen, which was I think one of the high points of this of this series, Wolf Pricks, showing us the very latest developments in Deep Himmelblau, something for which Daniel Bolojan, who's also with us, was responsible. An astonishing step forward, and I think things are happening almost by the day in terms of this particular field. Just yesterday, there was an exhibition that was curated by Hernandez Alonso with Casey Ream as the kind of AI guy behind it, called Bestia, Architectural Bestia, and things are speeding up rapidly. It is an astonishing field and very exhilarating in many ways. We're not there yet. There are a number of challenges. The idea of working with the possibilities of working in 3 dimensions are still challenging, and also the issues of control and so on and so on. But nonetheless, it's a field that is erupting and very rapidly. And just to echo a comment made by Matthias Telcampo, who's also here today along with Sandra Manninger, it's the first genuinely innovative field of architectural design or development architectural design in the 21st century. That itself seems to be clear enough. There's something astonishing happening. Anyway, so today, what I've been looking at so far, or we've been looking at, has been about introducing AI to architects. And this is the first of a 2-volume series that I've been working on. This book on the left-hand side is coming out in October, late October. And on the right-hand side, there's another book which I'm about to start working on called The Death of the Architect. They're kind of connected in some way. The one on the left-hand side is going to be largely white in its cover, the back is going to be white. And it's about the positive potential of AI, how amazing it can be, what it can offer us. And then the one on the right-hand side is a largely black cover, The Death of the Architect, which is the devil, as it were, the dark side of everything. And it will talk about about the demise of architecture, of the architectural profession in the age of AI. The premise here is the architectural profession is already suffering, and AI could just be the final nail in the coffin. So anyway, that's what we'll deal with today, and they are related in some sense, because once you recognize the potential of what AI can do, you begin to realize that should automatically lead to the death of the architect. So that's largely what we could talk about today. Just to say something I don't want to address right now, and that is to say, there are a number of people who've been talking about how negative AI can be. Stephen Hawking has warned us about the danger of AI. So has Elon Musk, potentially more dangerous than nukes. There are many people out there. There are also the negative critiques. Shoshana Zuboff's the critique of surveillance capitalism being one of the books out there that of course AI has been used for surveillance extensively. There's then, on the other hand, Slavoj Žižek points out in his recent book Pandemic that that actually surveillance may be a good thing in the age of COVID to be able to monitor those who have been infected and so on. But Žižek is also highly skeptical about some of the other developments, especially Neuralink, the idea of controlling our minds through Neuralink. That's one thing that Žižek has spoken about, and you can find these online. And also Stuart Russell, who is one of the key figures in the field, who wrote the book, as it were, on AI, or co-authored the book on AI. He also warns us of the danger, the potential dangers in AI, and it was responsible for sponsoring a short video called Slaughterbots, which is kind of scary. It shows you what autonomous drones can do and the dangers of autonomous drones. So there are dangers in that. I personally, the view I take is, yes, of course, there are dangers there. But what I want to stress is that it's not necessarily the tool itself that is responsible. I want to avoid the trap of technological determinism, whereby you say that AI is necessarily good or bad, or indeed that surveillance is good or bad. It's a question of what particular tools afford. And the book by J.J. Gibson, where he speaks about the notion of affordance. The idea of affordance, I think, is a very subtle term. It's not what tools don't force us to do anything. Tools have no agency unless you believe Bruno Latour's object network theory, which I don't. Tools have no agency to my mind, but you can do certain things with them. They afford certain possibilities. That's to say, you can take a kitchen knife and you can use it to cut your vegetables. You can also use it as a murder weapon. That does not mean to say that a kitchen knife is responsible for the murder in any way. Same with AI. It's not a question of so much as whether it's good or bad, but how you use it and what purpose it's been used to. So there are some bad aspects of it. We can also talk about how there are the biases we find in AI and so on and so on. There are some potential problems to watch out for, but to my mind, there's nothing nothing necessarily good or bad about AI. What I find, I think, the dark side of it is how terrifyingly effective it is. And I agree with Gary Kasparov, seen here with his head in his hands on being defeated by Deep Blue sometime in 1997. We just have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us. And this was the moment I mentioned at the very beginning when I was kind of like both amazed and impressed by AI, but also terrified. Boarding a plane in LA with my boarding pass, and the flight attendant said, "Don't worry about that. Just look at the screen." I look at the screen and it recognizes my face from every single other person in the world and tells me where my seat is. That's the point where I became terrified. It was on that trip to Shanghai that I decided to. I was already writing a book about AI. That decided to split it up into two books: how amazing AI is and how terrifyingly amazing AI is. So I want to talk about today about how terrifyingly amazing AI is before handing over to Costas. So the death of the architect. Let me simply say, when was the architect born? To my mind, and I worked on the translation of this, it was in around 1450 that Alberti defined the architect as we came to know him or her. The idea of the architect, and as Costas is here and is from Greece, the point that Alberti makes is that the word architect comes from the Greek. Until then, it was thought to come from the Latin and mean basically a kind of a carpenter and so on and so on. What he's saying is it means that the person in charge, architect, as in archangel and so on. The architect was an intellectual in his or her own right and was in charge of the whole field. The workman, the work person, was just a tool in the hand of the architect. Now, that's an important kind of comment because it relates very much to where we are right now. And the death of the architect has already been mentioned. The term is not new. This is an issue of Architect's Journal, where Fashion, Architecture, Taste, three of the most provocative architects from the UK, and there's a long, strong reference to the UK throughout this, Sean Griffiths, Charles Holland, and Sam Jacob, come back together, having disbanded their firm, to talk about why they think that the architect is dead. And put simply, there are two aspects of this, I think. One is the fact that the profession has become more entrepreneurial. For them, it's no fun anymore. It's become it's really a kind of business rather than anything else. And on the other hand, and they're all involved in teaching, that the discipline of architecture. And this is an important distinction that Stanford Anderson makes. There's the profession and the discipline. They're quite different. The discipline is what happens in academia. And there you find that it's expanding, exploding. Anything goes almost in the world of architecture, as Charles Holland sort of makes the comment he makes. Other projects, books, films, ideas, something you had for breakfast that morning, anything but boring old architecture. In some senses, the problem here is the fact that once architecture becomes everything, it becomes nothing. This is a comment that comes from Jean Baudrillard. The idea that once art is everywhere, art disappears. Once culture is everywhere, culture disappears. And this book by Marika Trotter and Esther Troy, the title is very clever. Architecture is all over. That has a double meaning. It means everything is architecture, but it also means that architecture is all over. Architecture is finished once architecture becomes everything. So you have this particular dilemma in the sense that there is a kind of crisis on both in the discipline and in the profession, but for different reasons. Surprisingly, very few have addressed this problem from within the profession of architecture. the AIA give the impression that everything's okay, and business is booming. The one group that has been skeptical about this is the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and they have a group called Building Futures that I used to be part of, the kind of think tank, as it were. And they commissioned some research on this subject back in, I think, 2012, and they published this particular pamphlet, a very slim pamphlet, not at all rigorous, because it's based on architects talking to clients and architects talking to students and so on. But nonetheless, they come up with a kind of warning, as it were. Interestingly, they've removed this from their website. But there are two things that stand out here. One is the kind of comment that's made here on the cover. In 10 years, we probably will not call ourselves an architectural practice. It will be something else entirely. The point being here that that most architects having to diversify and become industrial engineers and product designers and so on, industrial designers and product designers, and the term architect would be too narrow. That's one of the comments that has been made that's very provocative. But the important point also is that in the UK, at any rate, I don't know what the situation is elsewhere, but in the UK, more than half of all projects are undertaken in a design build contract at the moment. In other words, the architect is working for the contractor, for the building manager. Now, the point about that is that the position that Alberti has sketched out about the architect being in charge and the work person being a tool in the hand of the architect has shifted. The architect is now a tool in the hand of the contractor. Now, that's an important shift. In any case, there's always this figure that's been bandied around. I don't know where it came from. 5%. Only 5% of all buildings are supposedly designed by architects. And that's in the past. Just this last week, I was reading an article on the BBC about this new stadium for Everton Football Club in Liverpool, and I was intrigued to find out who the architect was. But interesting, there was absolutely no reference to the architect in this article. Now, we as architects, we feel ourselves to be very important, but there was simply no reference to the architect. I looked further and I discovered that actually the initial architect had been someone called Dan Mies, but he'd been kicked off the project. He'd been developing the project, but he'd been kicked off the project, and there was someone else that was brought on. The idea of the architect being in charge is something of the past, and we have to accept it. And the problem is, though, from my mind, is that architects themselves are not addressing this. If you look for books about the future of architecture, you'll come. This is one of the few books I found, The Future of Architecture, and he gives 100 buildings that this guy Mark Kushner, 100 buildings that he thinks will be influential. Influential from a point of view of aesthetics, basically, or maybe indeed to do with the way they operate, they function, and so on. But that's it. The future of architecture for someone like this is in 100 buildings. To my mind, this then represents the architectural profession at the moment, a profession largely with its head in the sand, ignoring the realities out there. And it's not as though those realities out there are a mystery. There has been a series of books. There is a whole library of books that have been published on this subject, many of which have been bestsellers. And I want to talk about two of them, The Future of the Professions and The Rise of the Robots, but there is a whole library, and it's a continually building library about the future of the impact of AI and automation on the professions. So to start off then with this book by Daniel Richard Susskind, came out in 2016, The Future of the Professions. And their message is very, very clear. We tend to think when we see these kind of Amazon packaging plants and logistics plants that where we can't see anyone at all, it's all automated, that it is the blue collar worker that is missing. Likewise, you go to a Tesla car factory, not a single human being to be seen. One can imagine, I think there is one person there, can imagine that therefore that the blue collar workers are going to be in danger. But the point is that it's not just the blue-collar workers, it's also the white-collar workers, and they spell it out very clearly. Technology will be the driver of change. We will neither need nor want professionals to work in the way they did in the 20th century and before. And their point is that the only reason why we've had professions has been what they call the grand bargain, a kind of gentleman's agreement, as it were. Okay, you're an architect, you design buildings, and you're a doctor, you're in charge of medicine, and so on and so on. And that grand bargain is potentially could be, as soon as questions of profits come into it, that bargain will disappear. We cannot be assured of our future as professionals. Meanwhile, there is another debate about the effects of automation. The point that Martin Ford makes about the rise of the robots is that we've been challenged before by technology. But the point about AI is it learns, and therefore it improves. And that's what makes it particularly challenging. And he has a story that he tells about a kind of a thought exercise about this sudden invasion that we get from a different planet. And these agents that come from a different planet appear, and they come to Earth, and they're willing to work for nothing. They enjoy working. They can work 24 hours. They don't need to be paid even. They don't need food. They don't need anything else. And at first sight, this is fantastic, and everyone welcomes this new invasion. And of course, these end up being they're robots. And the point being that gradually they become more and more effective. Initially they're used for very menial tasks, and eventually take on more managerial tasks, and they're welcome. And some people at the beginning begin to profit from this. They do very well from this. But gradually things begin to sort of collapse as they take over, and unemployment spreads. And the important thing that Martin Ford says also is that they don't contribute anything to the economy. They don't spend any money. Therefore, the economy itself begins to collapse, and the rest, as it were, is quite predictable. What he's saying basically is that robots will lead to a wholesale collapse of the economy. And another kind of comment that he makes, and this was published in 2016, which is to say it was written in 2015, and it kind of relates very much to the situation in the States, the debate over the southern border about immigrants coming in. And he points out that it's the robots that are going to take the jobs, not immigrants from outside. And then this, of course, became a big issue in the recent US elections, where Andrew Yang, the Yang Gang, point out that it's about automation. That's the problem. And it's going to have a huge impact on society. And actually, Obama had also mentioned this. Again, it had been foreseen, and yet still we think that actually it's to do with immigrants who are going to take the jobs that no Americans would want. The robots would take the jobs that no American would want, but somehow we ignore the fact they're going to be there. And finally, just to say that the impact of COVID, robots don't get COVID, and that there have been a number of comments made. This is only exacerbating the impact of robots. Robots are going to have an increasingly important role. And there is a wonderful rant online by a guy called Sebastian Errázuriz. And let me just stop sharing a second, and I want to share. Sorry, I need to go and just change my internet. Hold on a sec. Settings. Okay. No, I'm not sure if I'm going to catch this. Let me just try and see. This is Sebastian Errázuriz, who's a designer who has on his Instagram account, it's published in Design, has a whole rant about how architects are going to be unemployed. I just want to go and just play a small amount of it so you can hear.
Artistic practice is the only one that will survive, and it will be developed by a tiny elite. We're talking 5%, 1% of architects max. The rest, they're done, they're doomed, they're gone, finito. This is the end. Muerte. What can you do?
Okay. So he's very engaging. I actually invited him today, but he would have come, but had something else on. So I don't know if he's from Chile. I don't know whether. Sorry, have I? Can you see me again? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that was for Matthias, a Chilean accent. So, I mean, just briefly, robots versus humans. There have been a number of studies done, and I won't go into this in much detail, about whose jobs are most susceptible to automation. Carl Benedict Frey is an important scholar from Oxford who's been working on this field. And when we look at the list, we seem to be fairly safe as architects. They go through about, I think there are 800 or so professions they go through. This is the top of the ones that you, if you're safest, the higher you up through the dentists are fairly safe, number 19. And we get to architects where we're number 82. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Number 82 compared to, say, telemarketeers who are number 702, they're done. I mean, they're completely out of it. So we might think, because we're creative, that we are completely safe. And indeed, there are other studies. This doesn't include architects, but it shows you that sewers have got no chance. Animal trainers. Actually, I've seen some robotic animal trainers. I don't think that necessarily animal trainers are themselves safe either. But I guess, as architects, somewhere up here, we should think we're safe. The problem about this particular study, from my perspective, is it assumes a one-for-one exchange, that a robot will take over the job of a human being, as though this is you in your office and these are the robots who are eyeing up your job. Well, it's not going to be like that. It's not going to be, because of the way that we're going to operate is through a form of extended intelligence, augmented intelligence. The idea that we're going to use a prosthesis, use AI as an extension of the self, means that in fact there will be people working in the office, but it'll mean that not as many as before. When I was talking to Tom Main about this, he was saying, well, he has about 80 people in his office, and he said, well, I would prefer that. I would prefer to just have 12 people working in my office, because then I would get to know them. I'd know them precisely. I would know who I'm dealing with. So there are 12 people working in the office in the future. That means that 68 of them have been laid off. Anyway, so we've addressed this question. I won't go into this much detail, but I'll simply say that one of the most significant points that we came across in the whole discussion over the past few weeks was this particular move 37 in game 2 in AlphaGo. Lee Sedol commenting, everyone was thrown out by this hugely innovative move made by DeepMind, a move that none of us had thought about before, but that actually already existed potentially. But it was the capacity for the for AlphaGo to find that move. Whether it was creative or not is another question, but to find that move that really showed human beings up. Now, my point being, another comment that we've discussed in the session on performative AI, can we put it alongside this? And that is to say, it's already been discovered by, this is Hova Hoekland of Spacemaker AI, that the machines can also come up with strategies for architectural design, for planning especially, that we wouldn't have thought about. In fact, some of them were counterintuitive. But perhaps following on from that, another one, this is a discussion that we had over the Summer Digital Futures, including Wanyu He and Daniel Bolajan, who's also here today, and Maria Kansford and Howard Hoekland. The comment that Howard makes, that I think is incredibly significant, is that clients are beginning to insist that architects use AI. And they want to insist on that in order to guarantee their return on investment. So for all the amazing work that's been done using GANs and so on, all this incredible work that is opening up a new field of aesthetic expression, that's not going to be the game changer to my mind. It's going to be this, the fact that clients are going to insist that architects use AI. The model, I think, that we need to pay attention to is the model of the self-driving car. Already the car displaced horses. You're probably familiar with the comment made by Henry Ford. If I asked anyone what they wanted, it would be faster horses. People weren't aware that the fact that actually cars would displace horses, most horses became redundant once the car was developed. But it's a self-driving car that is interesting. And I want to pick up on a comment that made by Toby Walsh, who is the author of a book called Machines That Think, a title that is a bit controversial because I don't think machines do think, but nonetheless, he makes a number of fairly lame predictions about the future. But the one prediction he makes, I think, is really significant and highly significant, is not simply that self-driving cars will take over, but it's the way that they will take over. And what he basically, the prediction he makes is that self-driving cars will come along and they'll be very convenient. We won't have to drive anymore. But because we won't drive so often, we will lose our driving skills. And because we begin to lose our driving skills, insurance premiums will go up for human beings when they're driving. All this goes together to the point that people say, what the hell, we won't be driving anymore. And the point that he makes is that we will not even notice or care. And I think the point about self-driving cars is the way in which it's incrementally, and the way that it's developed has been by software updates. That's how Tesla developed and so on. Incrementally, it will start developing until it begins to take over. The same, to my mind, applies to architecture. Once we find ourselves in a situation whereby AI can design things without human beings, and once clients start insisting on architects using AI, there will be little option. We will be forced to use AI, and the point being, it'll kind of take over, just like self-driving cars. And my prediction is that we will not design buildings anymore, and we will not even notice or care. Now, I'm going to, Wan Yu is here today, so I want to pick up on one of the comments that she made, which I thought was very interesting. And this is a diagram that she showed in her discussion in the session on performative architecture, where we see how the machine is beginning to become more and more effective, and the tasks that human beings do begin to disappear. Now, according to Wan Yu, and I want to maybe ask her some questions about this afterwards, that leaves more time for human beings to do what they want to do. And that sounds like a rosy view of the world. It's also the view, I think, that coincides with Wolf Prix's view that, once AI can design buildings for us, we can go off to some desert island and go on holiday somewhere. I want to question that. I want to question that because, how long will that last? It might begin with, but once people start undercutting each other, and once clients discover that they can probably get away with something and people are offering services much cheaper by using AI, are we going to see this previous section, or is it going to disappear entirely? And what does that mean? If we leave out that top section, if machines take over, where are we once we reach that particular stage? I'm just briefly, these are some of the kind of conclusions I came to in my book. I won't mention this say much about this. I think number 2 is kind of interesting. We won't carry passports, keys, credit cards, or money around with us in the future. It'll all be done by facial recognition. That's already happening in China. You can already pay for things with facial recognition. There are some benefits, of course, that cities we spoke about city brain that's been developed by Alibaba, how we're going to traffic is going to be much better controlled and so on. But it's number 7, I think, is the important one, that architects will insist that clients will insist on architects using AI, and the consequences of this that really will be, to my mind, the most important impact of all this. And then we get to the point, number 10, where AI will be able to design a building completely on its own and detail it. I'm sure they'll be able to do that too, and know exactly what we want through our previous history and so on. Gradually, AI will take over the role of the architect. Well, from that point of view, all we've spoken about so far in this series about the amazing benefits of AI, about how incredible it will be, all the things that are very positive about AI, are also potentially the negative things about AI. Once AI can design, once self-driving cars can drive, we don't need to drive anymore. And once AI can design buildings, we won't design buildings anymore. Game over. So the irony here is that it was Alberti who, in 1450, described the role of the architect that we have had up until very recently as the architect in charge and so on. And I'm predicting in my book that by 2030, by the end of this decade, that notion of the architect will all but have completely disappeared. The irony here is that Alberti, who wrote the first book on architecture, the first published book on architecture, because Vitruvius was published later, his name begins with A and ends in I, and AI will be, in some senses, the final nail in the coffin. Having said all that, there is another side to things, a kind of a reprieve in some senses. And Sebastian Errázuriz has been already pointed out that there will still be some jobs left over, just as there are still some jobs left over for horses after the invention of the car. In other words, when you want to have a special moment, a royal wedding, or indeed any wedding for that matter, you will maybe have a horse-drawn carriage. Interestingly, actually, that the royal family in the UK has given up on this because of the danger of some security. You can't have bulletproof horse-drawn carriages. So there will always be that possibility. In other words, you can be extravagant if you want. Of course, it's much cheaper to have a car, and so on and so on and so on. But in moments of extravagance, you can do this. And in a sense, this is the logic of branding. If you have a bag by Gucci or clothes by Gucci or all these designer labels, they are, of course, expensive. But that's not the point. You want to show that you don't care about money by having those things. In Japan, for example, it's an insult if you give someone a cheap bottle of whiskey, kind of Walker's Black Label or something. You want to give that your colleague or friend the most expensive bottle out there, and that's the logic and sense of branding. You don't mind the fact that it's going to cost you more because you want to show that off. In other words, I think there will still be a job for the architects. They will still be popular. And just to kind of round up with a comment about this amazing talk yesterday by Zaha Code for Digital Futures, there'll still be the role for these kind of these big name architects because people will want to be able to be indulgent and engage with those and pay over the odds to get that kind of service. So I'm being deliberately provocative here, and Kostas has volunteered to actually contribute to this, to add the final nail in the coffin, as it were. So I'm going to hand over now to Kostas, and then I think we're going to have a very lively debate afterwards. So Kostas, it's great to see you here. I've got to say that you have a fan club among the Digital Futures PhD community who are logging on especially to hear you today. So welcome, Kostas. It's great to see you.
Thanks. I heard there was a funeral today, so I dressed up for the funeral, and Neil told me that there's going to be some nice strong coffee for us today, so let's enjoy it. So as a funeral, I thought I would offer some obituary, or let's say some eulogy at the end, because I think it's an interesting case. I like the word death. In a way, it's interesting. Again, you can look at death as a natural causes, somebody dying from old age, for example, or from an accident, but also death could be a murder. And I think we're talking about a murder, a premeditated murder that is going on. And if I were to take that position, I think the best thing I can offer would be some facts, okay? Because there are many interpretations of the truth, but there's only one true interpretation, not two, one. So that being said, let me bring up. So I don't know if you see this, where is it? Here. Sorry. Give me a second. So I don't know, everybody sees the word digital ethics and design? right? Okay.
Yes.
So, or as I say, D-E-N-D, which is the word dead. Let's start a little bit from the digital side, and let me give you some interesting facts. So, May 2019, Shanghai. I'm invited to a panel discussion on a book that one of our colleagues here, his name is Jan, you can see him in the picture on the top over here. He wrote a book and he wanted to tell us about it. And the book was about a series of paintings that he commissioned to be done. The guy is in love with Chinese artists. You can see a bunch of them over here, each one of them having their own style. So what he did is he commissioned these artists to make 7 portraits of him. These are some of them on the style of each one of them. And this is what was displayed at the gallery. And everybody was very happy to see, and they're very excited, and they thought, okay, how did you get to make these artists, which are so expensive because they're almost like the Picasso of China, to actually make his paintings. But there was a twist. The twist was that he actually didn't really have the artist do it, but he had them do it in the style of the artist. So what he did is he went to Dafan. Dafan is a city close to Shenzhen. And there are these artists that are basically fake artists. They're called fake artists, and they actually go and paint whatever you want. You can give them like I don't know, like Picasso's painting, they would do it. You give them a Van Gogh, they would do it for you, and they give him this thing, and that's what he did. He made these paintings over here. That was very interesting to me, and then started a whole conversation about the idea of the original. What is original? What is a copy of something? What is a forgery of that thing? And if you look at it, the idea of the original is an interesting one because it involves something very important, which is this on the creation of something. So basically, if you look back in time, you find that the idea of the original started initially as a painter. A painter was the person that actually would be original back, in the time, 100, 200 years ago, that would actually make something that we would call it an original piece, an original, whatever, artist piece. And then at some point in history, we have the invention of photography. So photographer was another person who actually would make a copy of the light impressions on a piece of film, and that would be an original of the copy of the painter or the thing or the reality that it was depicting. Then we have somebody called the Alterator, which is these people down in Dafen who actually would take a painting and they would change it a little bit. They would modify it in a certain way. And then we have somebody called the forger who actually makes a copy that is so close to the original that you cannot even tell the difference, okay? It's the counterfeit, if you like. And then we have in the world lately, we have this sort of the NFTs, which are basically a copy of an original digital copy of something. Now I was looking at these things, I was thinking each one of them having the original, the painter being the human, the photographer I would put as the mechanical paradigm of the representation. The alterator would be an algorithmic because you need some sort of a understanding of the copy of something. And then you would have the forger, which would be the meta, the painter of the painting, the copy exactly of the original. And finally have the crypto, where you actually would have to justify the idea of something being original based on other people observing that as witnesses in this crypto world of digital. But what struck me most in this whole conversation was not the human. That was not my point. I was realized at some point that something else is going on here. And I thought to myself, what if there is no human involved? What if the whole idea of art, design, creation, does not involve a human at all, not at all. So let me back up for a second here, just to give you like a perspective where things are right now. So as we said before, in the beginning, things were simple. A photographer was a photographer, a painter was a painter, okay? You wouldn't doubt the originality of each one of them. But something happened somewhere around 1990, where we have the introduction of a third person, not a photographer, not a painter, but we refer to this person as the user. Who is the user? The user is anybody. Anybody could be the user. I could be the user. My wife could be the user. My mother could be a user. Anybody could be the user of something because of the existence of certain software that allow that person to take a painting or a picture of a painting and then apply some sort of a filter on it and then become an artist. Let me give you an example. This is me, right? This is my face, which is basically a photo of me, if you like. And then, you know, I had my mother called me and said, like, look, I took your painting, your picture, and I applied this filter. Look how beautiful it is. And I was like, yeah, it looks very interesting. And they said, like, oh, how about this? Wow, that's pretty good, actually. Very interesting because she's not even an artist. She doesn't even know what art is. And yet she turned out to be more powerful than any of the artists. And if she was living 100 years ago, she probably would have changed the world of art. So that being said, I realized that something is going on. Somewhere there is somebody who is altering the world and democratizing, if you like, the world of design and art, who is providing to the user the means to become a fake, if you like, forger, painter, or photographer. Somewhere down in Silicon Valley, there is a guy sitting in front of a computer that is actually writing the software that is called Photoshop, which was given to my mother to pretend to be a user in order to make the alterations on photography. And that person, interestingly enough, is not even an artist. Most of these people don't even know what art is. They're probably engineers, computer scientists, fluid mechanics engineers. Why fluid mechanics? Because a lot of the art has this fluidity that is based on the engineering side of things. So, for example, take this very simple code that you can use to go through every pixel on the screen, every little pixel element, and then you take that position of it and you alter its position by a random disturbance of 4 pixels, right or left, up and down. And then you get the effect of a pointillistic, a Seurat, if you like, effect of the painter. Very simple. 3 lines of code produces this sort of effect. But interestingly enough, there's nothing about that has anything to do with art. It's just basically a random disturbance of the pixels on the screen. And what becomes even more interesting to me is that is all based on what we call an algorithm, code. And code, if you look at it more deeply, you cannot see right now, but as you said in the previous slide, is basically text. For example, it says for each pixel on the screen, the pixel is equal to the pixel plus a random disturbance. It's text, really. And if you take that text and you alter its, like I did, randomly disturb the text itself, what if at some point you produced a new algorithm that actually solves another problem that you never ever intended to have? And this is something going on right now, which is referred to as a neural network. A neural network is basically a system that is free from human intervention, where information is coming in and is coming out in a way that is different from the originally intended, producing as what we call an unintentional intention. And that, I think, is a very, very interesting area because it involves this sort of lack of human inside the process of design, okay? And this is where we're standing right now, okay? This is not anything futuristic. This is not something that is going to come. It already happened, and it happened like years ago. In fact, 5 to 6 years ago, okay? So the question again arises to necessarily is, who is the author? If it's not me, if it's not you, if it's not anybody we know, who is the author? Which brings me to the second part of it here, which is the idea of ethics, okay? October 2018, New York City. A painting was sold for $500,000, which depicted a individual. If you look closer to it, you're going to see that it looks like a regular painting. Nothing unusual about it. Actually, it looks like a pretty bad painting in a way. It's like an abstract, but on the bottom you have a signature that is not human. It's a mathematical formula. And if you go back, you're going to find that this, and you probably already know about it, it's based on an algorithm that uses two of these neural networks, as we call them, which are basically something I will talk about it later as a depiction of the way the human brain works. And basically what they do, the one is competing with the other to make the closest. So the one starts with something random completely, and the other has paintings. And as the two are, the one makes something that is a little bit less random based on the previous one. And then as it goes along, they start become more and more close. It looks, I can show you here briefly what it starts. It starts to produce something that starts to look like the original painting, starting to become closer and closer to the original painting, and yet doesn't come close enough, okay? And this is what it looks like. And this is kind of like interesting, but it's more interesting to me because it involves a mathematical abstract process of which we do not know how it was produced. The problem is, as I said before in ethics, is that the three guys, which were three students from Paris, from French students, they were able to sell this at Christie's for $500,000, almost $500,000, and they're very happy about it. And they were like celebrating about how this is like such a new way of art and blah, blah, blah. And they were giving interviews and they had the money and they were very happy. But all of a sudden, a fourth guy shows up and says, wait a second, guys, this is not yours, this is mine. I actually made this thing. And he offered a conversation in which the original three students said like, oh, we found this code of yours online on the GitHub and we would like to use it. Is that okay with you? And the guy said, yeah, it's okay because, you know, it's open source and, you know, I'm very open to using my code. And if you can help other people, you know, in the spirit of less helping. But then when he found out that these guys made $500,000, he said, hey, wait a second, this is not what I thought. You guys took my code and you actually modified it. And you made a new code that is actually something that made $500,000. You got to give me the money. So there was a big dispute over the over the incidents. But to me, the question was very simple. Who deserves to take the credit? Is it the three guys who pressed the button? Or is it the other guy who wrote the code? Or is it something else going on? Because clearly the three guys had no idea what they're doing in terms of the creation process. They knew how to press the button. And the guy who actually wrote the neural network of the GAN did not really know what's going to happen. So in a way, philosophically speaking, none of the four authors, potential authors, is really a true author because none of them possessed any intellectual prediction of what they would do. So in that sense, in my mind, philosophically, none of them is the real author because none of them owns the predictive power of knowing what they're doing. They're just observing something that happens without them out of their mind. Case number 2, March 2018, Phoenix, Arizona. Self-driving car by a company called Uber. You know them. 10 o'clock in the night, the car hits a biker. Not really. It was a woman homeless who was pushing a bike. So it looked like she was driving the bike. The system apparently thought that it was a bike, calculated the speed to be a biker, but then it couldn't figure out the actual speed and hit the person. and killed her later on. She was denounced dead in the hospital a few hours later. Meanwhile, at the driver's seat, passenger seat, there was another person who was supposed to be in charge, but this happened so fast. You can see here the woman on the right side, the homeless woman pushing the bike, so the car thinking it is a bike. And the surprised co-driver trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Again, this is the distance. There are some theories about what happened, but again, the blame in a way goes to who is to be blamed. This is the whole company, the Uber driverless car company. You can see about maybe like 60, 70 people. Is one of them responsible for the death, the murder of the woman in Arizona? I mean, we have a dead body here, right? The question is, who is to be blamed? What happened is that there was a settlement with the family of the woman for quite some money. And then the family said, okay, no problem. But then there was also a criminal investigation because, again, there was a dead body. The state of Arizona had to press charges against somebody. So eventually they said that the self-driving operator was charged for a fatal crash. But to me, none of this makes any sense. Again, philosophically speaking, the co-driver is not responsible because she was just supervising a car. The people in the whole, well, Uber itself, just because they paid money, doesn't take their blame out of it, okay? And finally, the people in the whole factory, the software company, could not be also responsible because in a way, it makes some sense for it to hit the woman because it could have happened to any one of us as humans. Because if you see something moving that it looks like a bicycle, but it's moving so slow that it's not a bicycle because there's something that obstructs at 10 o'clock in the night, maybe you would do the same mistake. And the question again arises, who is to be blamed? Okay, that is a very interesting question because as Neil said earlier, there is a knife and there's a dead body. And we always assume by definition that it has to be a human or an accident. But if it's an intentional murder and there's a knife, which implies that there is somebody who actually must have done it, we always assume that at the end of the day, it has to be a human, right? That's the Agatha Christie sort of like a plot that there's always like, you know, the butler or whatever at the end, but it's a human. What if it's not human? What if it was murdered by, what if we don't find any human in the scene and yet we have a dead body? We have an obligation to find who did it, who is the one behind it. And it's not necessarily a person, it could be a thing. And that's where the whole thing starts to become very, very interesting. And that takes us to the last part, which is the world of design. And I think there is a problem here. The problem is that we assume that certain things have a definition, and the definition that we give them is all based on human perspective. Especially in the Western world, we have this habit, if you like, that came from the French Revolution, that the human is the center of everything. We are the ones who actually make the rules. We're the ones who apply the rules. We're the ones who actually are in charge of everything. And that may be the problem. Maybe the problem is that we are defining things, especially concepts that are tangentially connected with human intention, to be by necessity human. And I believe that to be the problem. And unlike, contrary to Neil's sort of like idea, he keeps saying that when I define a word, it's etymology, which we call etymology, which is basically to go to the origin of a word to find what that really means, because it's important to know what something means in order for you to find whether or not you are understanding what that thing is, right? That's the first thing. And he thinks that meanings change over time. I don't think so. I think that the study of etymology itself is not even about the study of language. It's the study of truth. Etymon in Greek means truth. And the study of truth doesn't change. You know, maybe the interpretations of truth change over time, but truth itself never changes. It's always one and never changes. So in that sense, etymology to me, since I'm Greek, I thought, why don't I just go and find out what exactly is design? And why maybe the problem is that we think of design as something that is connected to humans, but it may not be so. Maybe design is not a human activity. So again, I'll go real brief over here. You probably know this, that design is from the Latin word design, designare, which means making something out of nothing. And in Greek, the word for design, or in Chinese for that matter, it's very interesting because Chinese have the same exact thing, that the word sheji or schedio is not about a human creating something, it's something else. In the case of the Greek word schedon, which is the origin of the word schedio, which means design, comes from the word schedon, which means almost, approximately, not there yet, about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And then this is derived from the word eskin, which is the past tense of the word I have, which means I had. So briefly speaking, I don't want to go into too much detail. There's the idea behind design is that design is not something we make out of nothing, but it's something that we remember, we had and we lost, something that was in our mind, but somehow we lost it and we're trying to find it. So it's not inside our mind, it's somewhere outside, and we're trying to discover where it was and how we forgot about it. So the definition, the Greek definition of design is very peculiar because it uses the word of recollection, the remember of something, something that we lost, and we're searching for that thing, which is not ours, but we have to make it ours by bringing it back to us. Which brings us to the second word that is important because it all is related to how we create things using our mind. And the word mind in Greek is the word nous. And nous, you probably know that because noises and noima, paranoid, when you say paranoid, you mean you're out of your mind. That's para and noid, which is the same word nous, which is derived from the word nemo, which means to arrange things, okay? And arranging is a very interesting concept because when we arrange something, we put things in order. Take, for example, like putting little balls into boxes. How many ways can we put them together? We have 4 balls, we can put in 4 boxes. There's 16 ways you can put them together. Either nothing, or 1 and 4 boxes, or 2 and 6 boxes, 3 and 4 boxes, or 4 and 4 boxes. And that is something that is, it's interesting because we're arranging things and we know in advance that there is a number of ways we can put them together. Also, we know practically there's no other way that we missed. These are all the possible ways. And to me, this is interesting because it doesn't involve my personal subjective interpretation. It is obvious, it's mathematical in a way, it is objective in many ways. So if I tell you what is the ways we can put 9 balls in 9 boxes, it would be 2 to the power of 9. And this is all the possible ways. And again, what's interesting about this is basically it's a black and white 3x3 bitmap painting, if you like, right? These are all the possible patterns you can make. So if you're looking for any patterns here, let's say a X pattern or a O pattern or a cross pattern or L pattern or T pattern, it has to be there because that is all the possible patterns you can make with 3x3 pixels. And of course, if you're looking for, let's say, the cross, you'll find it right there. There it is, right in front of you. And if you want to find something about the quality of all these patterns, let's say symmetry, you can do that and go through all the patterns and find what are the symmetrical, these are concentrically symmetrical, or what are the horizontal symmetrical, or what are all the vertical symmetrical, and you can find them, they're all there. And to me, this is very interesting because all of a sudden we're looking into design, if you like, or art or painting in a kind of like objective mathematical way, okay? And if you think about it, as Alberto said many years ago, it is about mathematics. And that is something that has nothing to do with us. We don't define the mathematics. It's not something that we are actually in charge of. So here's another example, very simple, like, because I have many examples from art, from design, but this is like an architectural where you have like a 2x2 and then you have these toilet arrangements, and then you have all the possible combinations, 16,000, then you get all together. So the question is, once you have all these, how do you extract the best one or the better ones? Is basically you eliminate. So design is not about making things, it's about eliminating things in the kind of sense that we defined earlier in the Greek sense. So if you don't want the toilet to face the door, because that's what Neufert says, you get rid of them. And if you want to find the closest, the shortest pipeline, you get only that. So then eventually out of 16 million, you get only 6, which are the best ones based on these 2 criteria. And again, the idea behind it is that we are reversing the whole idea of design, okay? Instead of starting from nothing and making something, which is what everybody believes based on the definition of the word design, that we are, again, the, if I said before, the humanistic version, that I am the one who makes design. I, as with my little brain or with my thinking about things, I actually make something. And I am the one who is responsible for the creation of something, which is one way of looking at it. And again, based on the definition of design being the true definition, or the opposite. Out of everything, I found something. Okay, it's the same thing. If you think about it, eventually you come up with something which is in your way the best solution. But the difference between the one and the other is that through coming from nothing to something, you're always doubting, is there something better? If you come from everything into something or into anything, you know you're for sure the best one because there's no other, since you did everything else. And that, I think, is a very, very important part of thinking about design. So that being said, let me take you into some very interesting, strange situations that happens here. So the words. If I take words and I randomly put them into a piece of text, I produce sentences. So sentences are very important. Toilets are not. I mean, unless you need them. But words have a much powerful expressive ability, and that is something that I was very interested in. So I said, okay, what if I take words and I put them into random order? Or I get all the possible permutations of these things. So here's one possible. I do these and I put them in different order, and I put them in a different order, and I start putting more and more, and I get like all these over here, and then I get more, and then more again. 16 million, a lot. Just to give you, this is just a little portion. Mostly it will be huge. And the question is, how do I find a sentence there that makes sense? And not only that, but what if there is one sentence inside these 16 million that is so profound and so important that it may even change the way I think? Okay? Think about it. Every ideology, everything that was ever said in the human world is one sentence, really, one sentence that changed the world. I mean, take religious, do to others what you want to do to yourself. That's a sentence, but it means so much to people that it created a whole religion. So what if in this series of words, there is one sentence that is so profound that it can change the way we think? So how do I find it? I'm sure there is a sentence somewhere here. It has to be. If there is one, it has to be. So I can't go into 16 million. So what I have to do is I have to make a version of me to look into each one of them, to extract, as I said before, as in the case of the toilet, to extract the best sentence. And I can't do it by human, so I just produce a copy of me, what we call a neural network, as in a pattern recognition system. Again, not a production, but a pattern recognition system. And as I do that, I go through all the sentences and extract the ones that are making sense, okay? And how do I do that? Well, it's very simple. You went to the syntax, you go through the grammar and the syntax, and then eventually from the syntactical ones, you find which are the subjects and the object in the verb, the SOV, and then you find which one are the ones that are violating the rule, but they're still syntactically correct. okay? And you can see here, these are the ones, the last one being a very interesting one, this one over here. And the sentence basically says, if it can think of you, you exist, okay? Think about it. If it, not a human, it can think of you as a human, then you exist. It's the reverse exactly of what we always say. If I can think of it, then it exists. But this is the exact opposite. And to me, this is a very profound sentence that just came from a extraction of the words. And again, I wonder, am I the author? No, I'm not the author. I mean, I can tell you that for sure because I can tell, I had no idea. I was surprised by the sentence that was given to me, and I want to use it, of course, in my work, but I didn't produce it. And here's another one. What if we put, instead of words, we put code, computer code, because computer code is even more powerful than words because it can be executed. Words are just executed in the minds of people, but computer code is executed in the brain of a computer, which is much more powerful, and it will execute it anyway. So let's say you have operators and operands, like you put like A times B modulated by C, or A plus B, whatever, A divided by C modulated by B. And then we go through all the possible combinations. Again, 8 to the power of 8, we already know they're going to be 16 million. But then what if some of them are interesting? Okay, so here is all the possible combinations. So what we do is we go, you can see the first one is I plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, all the way. All the possible ways you can put them, produce all the possible ways you can put the number 0 to 9 and the operations together in 8 placeholders. There they are, all of them together. And here is the results, okay? These are, and if again, these are in a long way. If you take them, these are 25. I just use a sequence of 25, and then I wrap them into a 5 by 5. 5 times 5 is 25. And I produce these patterns over here because it's a two-dimensional. And then I go and find what are the symmetrical ones, because symmetry is the condition here that I'm trying to put as a criteria of recognition without being something subjective, just a completely objective thing, which is symmetry. You always, we are not defining, we are not making symmetry, we're observing symmetry. Symmetry exists beyond our interpretation. So that's why I wanted to use that. And here is the final results. And here are the most interesting, if you like, that are being produced as syntactically different. And this one over here, for example, again, let me repeat. I did not invent numbers, okay? I just observed them. They exist in the world. I did not define operations. They exist already. I just find them and I use them. I did not define randomness. I just use random as a process to produce. And then I did not define symmetry. So this over here has nothing to do with me. I am absent in the whole thing. And yet I am the author of the drawing, whatever you call this on the lower left corner of this thing over here. Again, back, this actually was a paper that we wrote right now with Filippo and Hajin, and it's actually going on right now. And I would like if, Neil, you can send it to the group and they can read it, because it's very interesting. Again, it goes through the same things that I just said, okay? Again, back to the same question, who is the author, okay? And that is the most important to me, okay? And again, back to my original argument, there is the photographer and the painter, the user, the coder, and the neural network. And what we're experiencing right now is the rise of the mathematical sort of entity. I call it permutation or random or emergent. That's a good word to be used. An emergent sort of like quality, which is irrelevant to the human. Okay, that's the most important part. There's no human involved in these things. Neural networks do not involve any human. They're topological systems that somehow, and we don't even know how, they produce certain logical outputs that nobody can actually know. That's a big problem right now because it's kind of like a black box in that area. Permutation also, something that is irrelevant to humans. We just go through all the possible combinations or randomness in that matter. So the question again is the author. And again, the author is not anymore, the author is dead, it's been murdered, okay? What is emerging right now is somebody else, which is called the tool author. A tool is the future. The tool is the one who produces the thing, not us. We are not important in this. We're important as far as we are able to make the tool. After that, the result of it is irrelevant to us, okay? And that's kind of like, in a way, my interpretation of the murder. So that's why it's a premeditated murder, which is being done not by anybody. It's not a human creation. It's not a murder by a knife that somebody is handling. It's more a murder that happens on its own. It's a revenge of nature, if you like, to the human species, if you like. That would be a better, like the ghost in the machine, to use Gibson, since Neil likes Gibson, that kind of thing. So that being said, that's about it. I mean, there's more things to have to do with the lab that we're doing. We're doing a lot of things with permutation design. Again, in the context of architecture, not much. We have applications mostly for fashion, for cooking, for music, for makeup, a little bit architecture probably. This is like one of the, like looks like I'm living in the space over here, which is basically, in a way, you start with a program, you randomly put the pieces together in a kind of puzzle way, and then you get a plan of a building, elevation, sections, everything. And then every time you press, you get a different building. And in this case, you have a different library. This is a library project that we did, and different versions of it, on and on and on. This is a little movie that we made with all the possible combinations as a, almost like a DNA, sort of a genome sequence of possible ways you could put architectural plans together. And then this one was a text base that produced these sort of like crazy texts that were stories that we had no idea where they came from, like a story about some sequence of events, or a soap opera, if you like, in which the actors are doing things that are evil to one another. And then the problem again occurs as to who is the author of this. I mean, theoretically, it's me, but I don't even know what's going on, and I don't even agree with what the actions of these actors are doing, and it's completely out of my mind. And yet, at the absence of anybody else, I am the author. But what if the author is the system? What if the thing is the author? What if it thinks of me, then I exist? So back to you, Neil. Sorry for the long story, but this is my personal history about this kind of thing, because I think it's a very interesting area. I mean, again, death, I'm very interested in death, but more of a murder rather than a just death.
Don't apologize, Costa. That was terrific. Maybe we can unshare this. You can unshare your screen just so we can get a discussion going.
Appropriate funeral today.
Sorry?
I hope I'm dressed appropriately for the funeral today.
We're both wearing black. I think Costas comes from the Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, but because of the occasion.
Do you want to unshare your screen just so we can? Thank you so much, Costas. That was really a bravado performance, and very precise in its own kind of way. We have the Greek mafia here. We have Manos and Theodoros here as well. So, and lots of other individuals. It's actually a very interesting discussion today. I think many of the things that I put. Well, interestingly, there was a lot of conversation in the chat when I was talking. when you were talking, Costas, I think you got largely rapt attention. So I got to congratulate you on some of those kind of questions. There was a debate going on there in the chat. So really fantastic. So let's have some questions. Maybe I don't want to put Guan Yu on the spot, but I think Guan Yu is a central part of all these discussions. I mean, not least because Costas, when you and I met up in Shanghai once, and Costas was laying out his theory with a plate of biscuits or cookies, and the idea being that actually all the things in the world already exist. It's just, and he put one of the cookies behind his back. It just, we don't necessarily all know about all that they're where they all are, what they are. So there is a kind of very consistent, I think, approach in Costas's thinking, which is interesting in its own sort of way. And I don't know whether you'd like to kind of comment in any way on any of these comments, on any of his thoughts, or especially the comment that I made that maybe, I mean, my point would be that your diagram about having more time to go and spend on ourselves is a utopian one, because I think that the marketplace will become so competitive that people will be undercutting other people, and that idea about the machine giving us time to enjoy ourselves, giving us, as in Wolf Prix's terms, time to go to some sort of desert island, is probably going to be unlikely.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Costas. It's really nice to see you again here. Sorry, I cannot really turn on my camera because my signal here is not really stable. Anyway, it's fabulous about what you lectured today, and I totally agree with you that I don't think design is really find something it's not existing, but to reveal something already might exist but haven't been seen before. But also related to my diagram, it's not like everything's the same. I mean, the level of intelligence or the level of AI. So we might need to consider what is our level today of the technique. For instance, for the autopilot, there's a L1 to L5, and the current autopilot is at L2.5 or L3, let's say. You still need to touch on the wheel, the handle, to control the car, and to also to indicate where you want to go, and the car follows in your instruction. Same as the AI as a tool for architecture. Also, as what we do as Xcool, we are not handling the decision making to the machine right now. Maybe one day, I mean, at level 5, let's say, but now we are still like L2.5 to L3. We need people to make decisions. So this is also how we considering design. There's 2 levels of design, or there's two different degrees of design. I think the first degree of finding something, reveal something, this is the first level, to find all possibilities, to reveal the possibilities, and to draw it out or whatever, represent it. This is the first level. And second level is after L3, is you need to make decisions out from all those possibilities. I think in this way, design is more like a operation management, let's say, very similar to what Costas mentioned there. So this level of intelligence is so complicated, especially for architecture. We have to make decision upon a lot of circumstances, the demands, all the things. So this thing can only be done by the experienced architect today. So at least I think for nearly 5 to 10 years, the machine cannot really make decisions on those things. And also for the massive production parts, as we do here for the real estate developers, they have a very clear goals of their projects, for instance, the economical goals. So the decision making could be easy, but there are other architectural kind of a typology, let's say. They are not really considering the economical goals, but other aspects, more public or more aesthetic, I don't know. But those parts are something the machine cannot really handle, especially the subtle changes or the virus of the balance. So yeah, this is my point. I think we still
So
have a
when
way
you
to go to bury the architects. I don't think this is the death, but the kind of a reborn, because architects need to do more things to be more intelligent than the machine at a way to make decisions. Yeah,
so when
Costas,
you
please.
who is the murderer of the Arizona woman? I mean, I hear what you're saying,
This
but
is
give me a very simple question.
yeah.
There's a woman, there's a dead body. Who is responsible? Can you answer that question?
This is a very moral issue, but from my understanding of that case is the guy sitting in the car, whoever it is the owner of the car or whoever. He is taking charge.
Why would a person next to, if you are in a car and somebody drives and they hit somebody, are the passenger going to go to jail or the driver?
Yeah, definitely the driver who controls the things. So we
Right, so
need
why
to
do you
firstly
put the
define.
woman? Why do you want to put the
Sorry?
co-driver then? Why you put the passenger in jail if the driver is the one who killed?
Yeah, but
I
the
mean,
driver, actually the people sitting in the car is not just passenger, right? Because right now let's be more specific. Now the autopilot is at level 3. It's not level 5. It's not the like Google car. It's non-people driving. It's not that. It's autopilot, means you have to control the wheel. I also drive the Tesla in LA with Neo. So he knows that you have to control the car. So at this moment, let's talking about right now, okay? Like in coming 5 to 10 years, 5 to 10 years, we still have to deal with the machine, which is not really taking over. We still need to control it. So for that case, it's definitely L3, and it's definitely the guy sitting in the car who needs to control the car, but he didn't, or she, I didn't know who it was. So this is the case, but eventually there might be a day L5, there's no people driving. It's another thing.
I think this
So
is similar with this is I think similar with if you own a dog, for example, and the dog bites somebody, is the dog's fault or is the owner's fault? Who's responsible for that, you know? And here it's like you are the one putting the object in motion. It's not the object itself. It's not the object itself putting itself in motion. You're the one putting the car in motion. So you're the one responsible then for whatever is happening with the car. You know?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel.
So anything that is set in motion is the motion initiator is responsible for the actions of some. That doesn't make any sense.
So if I'm throwing an object and the object hits somebody, it's not the object's fault. It's my fault. No.
If a body is murdered and there's no human to be found, who is responsible now? You have a dead body with a knife next to it and it's dead, and there's nobody ever came into that room, nobody exited that room, and yet there's a dead body, and there's seems to be an intelligent behavior on the murder side. But you have a little robot in there. Who is responsible now?
Well, maybe I
so
could just.
Costas, you think there's no one control the machine? Eventually, the machine will control itself to kill someone or to do bad things.
Whole point. That's the whole point that we're trying to make. That there is something that is.
Yeah,
emerging,
if it's that point, then we will into another degree of discussion. It's like a more sci-fi kind of part. But this is my favorite. That's my favorite. But yeah, the thing is the corporation which behind it to design this system, and this system is not be be taken or be controlled by individuals. But it doesn't mean this system be created by nobody, it by somebody, right?
Right, but the problem is that inside the system, there is something that is unknown. Nobody knows how it's happening. And that's where the problem is, because that thing has intelligent behavior, and yet there is no human that is controlling, or for that matter, justifying the working of the system. And that's what we're trying to see, because exactly at the end of the day, fine, you think this is something going to happen and we don't care, and like the people are going to be responsible always, but one day you may be replaced by a machine that actually has intelligence better than yours. That's the whole point of Neil today, is that somehow at some point we'll be replaced by, not by another human who is smart enough to actually replace you, but it's going to be replaced by something that doesn't even know your existence. And then you're going to start thinking twice about what you just said, because then you're going to realize that it's me who's been affected. But at this point, there's a dead body in in Arizona, who cares? But if it's you, if it's your family who got killed, you want to find who's the murderer. You want to actually find that person for the sake of your own personal justice. And that becomes a problem, because you cannot find anybody human. And then you find a scapegoat, which is probably that the co-driver invoking the L3, L4 sort of like level of intelligence, but it's not satisfactory to me. And again, we're looking from a philosophical point of view, because that's the most important. Things are happening not to be justified on an ethical, legal, or consequential in the human world. We're talking about something that is happening that is not based on human. Like I said before, all this art that is being produced, all these design decisions are not human. That's the question.
So Costa, you're defining something which is kind of important, the notion of interpretation, right? And because it echoes throughout a lot of both the question, but also, and I don't know if the role of the future architect is going to be one of really interpreting results, and if it's still going to be able to attribute meaning to this kind of interpretation. But going back to the notion of rearrangement and design as this kind of redistribution of or requalification of the best permutations. I want to return to the example you gave with the words within the sentence, and the notion that, for example, if it can think of you, then you exist, which is a kind of strange meaning that prior to us trying to understand all this kind of, if that permutation makes sense with our own human-centric framework, this would something that would be completely dismissed. And so it's kind of interesting. I don't necessarily have a question, but more of a kind of observation that it's kind of interesting that perhaps there is so much that we may have missed because of the way we have looked at things in terms of design possibilities. On the other hand, there is kind of interesting pessimism in seeing that if design, overall design, is to classify and select, even through a human filtering, this kind of best solutions, then that means that the room for creativity, does that depend entirely on interpretation and not so much on creation anymore, because those are finite? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Tom Main, he said like, oh, I like not to have any more people around me. And then eventually, but one day, what if Tom Main is replaced? He's not going to like it at all, is he? That's what's happening. So Tom Main kind of like that. This person who actually makes all the decisions based on his own, because I know him pretty personally. And he's kind of like, he makes his own decision. He has a character, he has a style that he defines on his own, but that's it. And the question is, what if he gets replaced?
I would think that's wonderful. Well, maybe there's a lot to unpack here, actually. Costa, thanks a lot for your amazing lecture. Thank you, Neil, for the introduction. I'm the renegade today in white, not in black. Maybe my background is black, my clothing is white. Maybe I'm just doing a cultural appropriation of Japanese culture, where white is the color of grief. But a couple of other things that are happening here, which I'm a bit curious about. Let me put it this way. So for some, I mean, there's so many things here, but I would like to start basically with one part that Kostas mentioned about the aspects of the coder, the user, the photographer, ideas of human, mechanical, algorithmic, meta, and crypto definitions that he has been using to specify certain areas of interrogation. From the get-go, I would like to say that I'm not as pessimistic as both of you. Working more and more with AI algorithms, the more I work with them, the more I notice how much actually I, as a human, still am present in the work that is getting done. Through the selection of databases, the application of specific bias in one or the other direction, through working with the weights of the algorithms, and so on and so forth. There's like so many areas where we as humans definitely have a hand into what the AI is doing, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Kostas mentioned Tesla. I would also like to mention the parole case AI that basically decides parole cases in the States, which was proven to be biased into a specific direction. So we're learning. We're in a very early stage of understanding what we can do with this technology. Yeah, and the same accounts for architecture. And to the aspects of the idea of Photoshop, the user and the coder, and things that aspects of agency and authorship. This is a very interesting and very, I think, interesting interrogation of what it actually means. For example, in terms of language and authorship, I only would like to point out to Michel Foucault, for example, who was highly critical of the idea of the author in general and rather saw the authorship in the language, which I think in the context of AI and artificiality is very interesting. In fact, the whole area of semiotics in terms of how it applies to AI and language could be a very interesting area of speculating theoretically about AI in general, because semiotics is so, I think, useful for speculating about artificial in general. And same, for example, with Roland Barthes, who also was critical about this idea of authorship. So there's a tradition in philosophy about being critical about authorship in general. And I think AI discussions can somehow be tied to these ideas of understanding critically what authorship actually means, what agency is, yeah, but also what, for example, the development of a new sensibility means. Because one of the things I have observed in working with this is that it is capable of capturing features, yes, that's true, of certain databases that you feed it, and they can be stylistic. Like, for example, Kostas, your example of Obvious's work, the portrait of Bellamy, for example, is obviously based on It's obviously based on a database of paintings from the West from the last 500 years or so. Yeah, it's biased culturally completely. Yeah, that work, but it also lets us still recognize features of those paintings so that we can recognize it as being from the canon of Western portrait culture. Yeah, so there's enough familiarity in it to drag our attention, but at the same time, it's strange enough to be considered innovative or different or new. Yeah, whether it's new or not is another complete conversation, by the way, because is it something new if it's based completely on existing data? This is to be discussed. It might be, it might not be. So so there's like a whole area of things here which are important, especially, for example, also the idea of, does it replace architects? Well, here comes actually, I think, the idea of defining what intelligent behavior actually means. Intelligent behavior includes intentionality, intelligence, and adaptability. And that's what architecture has to do. It has to adapt to the situation, understanding what is its role in this post-human culture, in this post-human idea of what agency means. Yeah. And for your point, Kostas, I think, which is highly interesting, you brushed quickly over it, but it's an interesting point, whether actually cultural production that arises from neural networks and artificial intelligence is perceivable by humans. Because it also can be created in a way that it's not visible for us or not audible, if it's music, for example. Yeah, it can be pure data that we cannot decode anymore, but it's still a piece of art. But who defines that, the human or the AI? So there's like all these really strange things happening right now, which are super interesting. Aspects of morality and bias, of course, are super important. They shouldn't be dismissed. But also at the same time, one last thing I want to add is about the example of your mother using Photoshop, which I thought was really fun. Yeah. there's one thing about that. I mean, the emergence of AI-aided artistic production, let me put it that way, where everyone can edit a movie based on a neural network that understands how to edit a movie well, or we also have automated movie script editors and writers. We have snapshot filters. They're all based on AI, facial recognition, and so on. So there's AIs everywhere, right? Which leads to the problem specifically in cultural production that we are flooded with bad art. Yeah, because people don't have the sensibility to even use these tools, even if they're aided with them. So not everyone can do art, in my opinion, even using those AI-assisted tools. The same accounts for architecture. I don't think that everyone can do interesting, innovative, meaningful architecture using AI tools just because he's using AI tools. I think there's still going to be a remnant, at least, of human sensibility that understands, yes, this is something I can work with, which is going to do something that is interesting and different and new. And we're going to see where this goes. But for the idea that it can replace 95% of architects, this is already the case. It's not new. This has been ongoing for the last half century or more. I mean, we all know that that there's only like about 5% of really good, interesting, innovative architecture around. And it probably was never more, by the way, than that. I think it's an illusion of us architects to think that we ever had any importance in the built environment. Yeah. So I think we're still, you know, it's not the death of architecture. It's not the death of architects. Yeah. By the way, there's a really strange, morbid attraction towards suicide by the architectural community. We have been declaring the death of architecture for the last 20 years. I mean, death of theory. There was actually an exhibition literally called The Death of Architecture in 2000. So we have this attraction to somehow make ourselves obsolete for whatever reason. I don't understand why. We should have proud in what we do and understand that it's a valuable contribution to culture.
Can I continue on this, just a bit on this idea that Matthias is saying? I mean, I have the same feeling that usually we make this kind of predictions, and usually what happens is that we always claim this kind of, in 10, 15 years, you know, AI is going to take over, and then all is doom and gloom in a way. And I think we kind of lose perspective there because technology is not there, yeah? And I don't think it's going to happen that way. And what happens with this kind of way of looking at things is you're discouraging, in a way, progress, in a way, in architecture, because many people are going to be like, you know, there is not enough time, it's just going to happen, or they are not going to care anymore to do anything about it, yeah. But if you have a more realistic, in a way, and then it becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, all this, like the death of the architect, yeah. But if you have a more realistic, in a way, view, and you realize in a way where technology is and which is the rate of adoption in architecture of that technology, you might realize that maybe it's taking us something like 40, 50 years perhaps to get there. And then maybe if you have that kind of view, you start to think, okay, how can we embed now this kind of technology properly? Yeah, it doesn't have to be that, you know, the architects are dying, but how do you properly then use this technology maybe to make us even better, yeah, to be even better at what we are doing, you know? And I think that kind of more realistic, in a way, view can help, in a way, architecture. It's the same way, like with this aspect of all architects are going to claim that they are using AI, and that attitude is going to harm the application or the adaptation of AI in architecture, you know. So the same thing happens also with this kind of like very dramatic, in a way, like 15 years architects are gone, is going to stop, in a way, progress in the end. So we have to be, I think, more careful and more realistic here.
Just to make one point about death, my publishers tell me that death sells. That's probably one reason why they like Agatha Christie novels and so on. No, I think that the big issue to my mind, and what I was intrigued by was Wan Yu's comment of 5 to 10 years, because I mean I don't think this is going to happen just one moment. I mean, one of the comments I made before was that, you know, in terms of the self-driving car, it kind of creeps up on you. There's gradually, we might not even notice it when it happens. But I'm intrigued by Wan Yu's sort of comment. This 5 to 10 years, partly because in my book, which my prediction was that by 2030, AI would be able to produce something fully automated that, going down to the level of details, the kind of overcoming BIM kind of comments that Wanyu was talking about a few weeks ago, that was my kind of comment. But based on the fact that probably my book will be out of print anyway by then, so no one's going to notice. But the time scale is interesting, you know. And I want to ask Wanyu why she puts 5 to 10 years on it, and what exactly does she think is going to happen in 10 years' time? What position we'll be in? Because I mean, I think, you know, one of a lot of comments coming in the chat here, and Theodoros, whose work I really respect. I mean, he's one of the authors of some of the software that's been used, is saying that we're a long way from these things, and of course we are. But conceptually, it seems like it's not that far away. I mean, once you're in a situation, there was some app that I was reading about this week that was saying that, you know, you can look at, people can find their ideal match. You show some faces on the screen, and eventually it'll work out from your reaction which one is you're going to like, and eventually give you an ideal partner. Well, I don't know if it's going to be correct or not, but conceptually that's possible, and that must be true also of architecture. That eventually, you know, AI is going to be able to know what our tastes are based on our previous data, and be able to offer us something that seems to come very close to our taste, just as Spotify music can do it already. So I don't know. I want to just kind of ask that question to Wanyu. Why the kind of the 5 to 10 years, and what is that based on? I mean, I'm just intrigued. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just intrigued on why you think it's that length of time. Okay, maybe Wanyu's not there. Yeah.
No, sorry, it's my signal delays. Hello?
Yes, hi.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I want to just add furthermore about the future part after 10 years or so, that the machine can really take over. It maybe sounds more sci-fi part, but I do thought about this part. I think from the technical part, every ID of the AI has their own identity. This is the first thing. For instance, a AI has been trained by different data and be involved to something new or something even more advanced. And this is the uniqueness of this AI. If we back to today, our AI is for architectural design, but let's be specific, it's for residential area design. So every AI cannot solve every single issue. It has to very indicate to very narrow issue, like the Tesla is doing autopilot. This is what they do. They cannot do making cookies. No. So this is the individual functions of those AI or machine. And if you use the neural networks to train itself, every identity of the AI is different, because this Tesla car has drive from, I don't know, #1 road from entire United States, and it takes a lot of images of the roads and learn things, which is different from another Tesla car, let's say. So maybe in the future, there will be some kind of a AI identity or machine identity. With those, we can give it a semi-human rights. I don't know, that it has to take responsibility, and it has to take insurance, and it has to share the authority. I don't know if the authority means something to it. It doesn't, maybe, but if you guys also look, read or look some or watch some movies, sci-fi movies, there's one called Artificial Intelligence, which is a very old movie, 2005 or something, or 2001. It will say if a machine did something wrong, it will be terminated. Yeah, and this machine has some idea on it. And this is the future still under debate, if AI should be given a legal entity or not. But yeah, we don't have an answer on this yet, because how to define this machine has its own thoughts or own sense, or it can be made to those different identity or not. Who to define it? And it's by the corporate, corporations or human or by machine itself. I don't know, but I think when we reach to level 5, we definitely need to make those systems for it, the entire system. It's similar to human system maybe, but to collaborate with human systems, it's different, but it has to merge with human system to somehow control the machines. Yeah, that's my point.
But maybe just throw something out there as well, Costas. I mean, the point about the murder is actually it doesn't have to happen. The murder. I mean, there's also you can be convicted of intentionality, of planning, plotting to commit the murder, which adds another level of complexity to it. One of the comments in the chat about the Tesla is that. That you have to sign some sort of warranty taking responsibility for the car itself, and I'm just wondering whether there'll be some kind of formulaic sort of way of operating. Like just now, for example, if you're an accident and if you happen to be the car that rams another car from behind, you are responsible, right? It's kind of the way it goes. Even if the car in front jammed on its brakes and you didn't have time to, you're still responsible as the car behind. So maybe I assume there might be some sort of some kind of legal formulation that might come into place. I see that Theodoros has got his hand up. Theodoros, over to you.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks for the very nice discussion and presentations. It was very inspirational. I think I wanted to maybe touch on a couple of points. One interesting thing that I thought of, because when you was talking about sci-fi movies, I remembered of my favorite sci-fi movie. Which is one of my favorites, The Fifth Element. And I don't know if you know, there's Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, there is Gary Oldman playing a very evil man, right? And there is this beautiful scene where he's choking on a cherry, right? And his idea, he makes this whole speech about how automation is beautiful, He breaks a glass and then, 5-6 different robots come out and they all clean, and he makes this story about how good this is for the world and everything. And then, of course, he chokes on the cherry and nothing can save him. And I think I find this as a beautiful parallel, because I don't like the vision of automation for AI. I really don't like it. Like, I feel that automation is kind of in the way, Zorg describes it in the movie. It's very manual, I feel, future, in the sense that there are people behind it that are working for it. And in fact, this might not be a very popular opinion, but we have this right now, right? We have a machine that regularly breaks in architecture. We have like big software, like I don't know, Revit, for example, and there is a whole community of tools around it whose main scope pretty much is to fix the things that break, right? And that's how they provide value to the community. And the whole idea is, all these little robots that try to fix the big mess. And I feel that that's sort of like the vision of automation. And I don't think like it's fitting for, thinking of AI as, AGI, as we're discussing it now, like you can design something from beginning to end. I wouldn't call that automation. I would call that creation. It is creation, and it's definitely very far away to go to the other point. I think that we are very far away, even though there is a big discussion and people working on alignment, which is the word people use in AI right now for the discussion you had about what happens when you do have superior intelligence, models or agents that can do all these things. What is the ethical responsibility and how can we align them? That's why the word alignment. How can we align these agents to our goals and our values, right? Because, for example, you mentioned, someday we won't have to build a house. And maybe some agent will build the house. Okay, how can we align that agent to the sort of, values and needs and requirements maybe of the real world around us? But that part, if we reach it and when we reach it, I think it's totally creation. It's not automation. There's nothing about automation in there, I think. And the only way I see reaching it, and I've repeated this many times, is always with sort of the architect in the loop. What the role there is, I'm not sure. Like the obvious thing to say now is a discriminator. I think Manos mentioned this, maybe, you interpret designs and something like that. I think we will play a much stronger role. I've said before, I'm in a community, I don't do art, but I hang around like brilliant AI artists, let's say, and they do a lot of work, It's not just, just by pressing a button and something comes up and I'm interpreting it. They do a lot of work, a lot of coding, innovative coding, new architectures, new layers, new losses, and searching painfully all night through latent spaces and new data sets that they collect. Like, it's a lot of painful work. It's actually artistic work, you know? So I feel that, you know, this is not going away. Like, even when we do develop these systems, and they will be developed through this struggle of people fighting with the systems, right? Still, there will be a very active role for designers, right? I really believe that. And my vision is that, you know, yes, maybe the star architects actually are displaced or maybe replaced by a big AI that can do some amazing buildings. But my hope is that we'll have more design than before. I've said it before, like, we will have every single building out there. We'll have proper performance-based design, proper selection of materials, proper construction, quality construction, all this stuff. This is what I want to see. So I want it to actually lead to more design, not less, both creatively and practically, if that makes sense.
Matthias, did you want to say something?
Yes, maybe to Theodore's comment, which is very telling in terms of how he was describing the work of those artists he has been working with, and, you know, how much effort and work goes into actually making these things work. There's a couple of things to be said about this. Like, number one, it's actually incredible that almost on a weekly basis, there's new papers coming out that propose new kind of neural networks that allow you to dig deeper into these problems and maybe find better solutions that we have so far, even if architecture has only been dealing with AI for, like, in a more larger agency in the last couple of years. There's still so many things that are open to us. And I can also say this from the work we're doing with our people at computer science in Michigan, and the robotics people, is they come very often and say, look, Matthias, this thing came out, it's kind of cool, maybe we can work with it. Yeah, so the collaborative aspect of this is highly important, and I would really emphasize that. And the other thing being maybe that we need to differentiate between supervised and unsupervised learning in the things we're doing, because a lot of the things we've been doing recently was supervised learning, where we specify the database and specifies the data that goes into that network. But it seems to me that the more interesting part is when you have unsupervised learning, because it seems that there are things happen that are a bit more surprising to us in terms of the results that can really contribute to an innovation within our field, because it's not, there's not that sort of bias from our own sensibility or ideas of architecture. We have to open up and see, like, okay, if this is the proposal, then maybe we can work with it. And another aspect which I really also emphasize in Theodore's comment, which I highly appreciate, is the idea that we're not talking only about the top 5% of architecture that is done by artificial superstars or something like that, yeah, but rather by the common good that come out from AI to architecture, which I think could lead to better vernacular architecture. It's just better design, spatially, better material consumption, better energy consumption, like all these sort of things that are more common and normal, and for many architects might be boring. Because it's automated, they get an incentive to use it. You know, it comes in as, let's say, sort of a free benefit to the architectural discipline. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the architecture is more interesting or more beautiful or exciting. Yeah, but it's good. Yeah, it's good for everyone. And if this can be done completely automated by somebody who cannot afford an architect somewhere in I don't know, I don't want to even name a country now here, but if it's a benefit to make for them better architecture through an automated system that was designed by architects at some point in history, then I think it's a benefit for everyone.
I just wanted to mention something, and maybe Daniel can also help me here with regards to, again, the human role within any kind of future interface that we begin to experience, which is one, I think, what we don't like yet, or we cannot yet accept, is our ability to interface, and I mean to somehow dynamically interact with the neural network. Because relative to Matthias's comment about unsupervised versus supervised learning, I agree that there's clearly probably a lot more possibilities for some creative discussion within the unsupervised framework, but only if we can begin not to just pre-encode the intentionality in the network, but to somehow dialogue with it at some point. And I think it goes back to like the workshop which we taught in Digital Futures was trying to essentially chain a series of networks, and our interest was not so much in the discrete results from different groups, but rather in the ability of both the groups to interface with each other and the ability of one network to interface with another network. And I think by extension, you know, in a kind of future working environment, let's say you have this kind of ability to exchange, to have a conversation, whatever that may mean, with an AI, even to a degree to which you could acquire some sort of intuition about tweaking parameters within this kind of unsupervised learning process, so that you can get results that were, you know, more valuable. And again, I don't want to, you know, define what valuable is here, because I think it's kind of fairly open-ended. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Daniel.
Yeah, so I think and for us at least, you know, this is the understanding. Like if you work with unsupervised learning, mostly you're engaging almost in a sort of automation of design, in the sense of you just have a machine learning in a way the representation of the designs that you input, let's say, and then based on that is going to be able to create automatically, in a way, designs the same way that you as a human will do that. Yeah. And that's why for us is then very, very crucial in a way not to have this kind of process as one single process of unsupervised, let's say, but you have multiple, in a way, processes where maybe in some instances makes sense to have unsupervised, but in other instances it's very important to have supervised to encode maybe certain ideas, you know. And then that kind of we call it almost like a self-organization of this kind of networks, and this kind of feedback between the networks. That what leads then to something truly creative, and something that augments, in a way, creativity. Is not something that is just automating in the sense of, you know, it's just going to output based on the data set that you give, you know.
Neil, do you mind if I open a question to everyone?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was curious about maybe Costa's or other people's comment on the idea or problem that we as a discipline, architecture as a discipline, has a potential data set of architectural solutions, let's say about 2,000 to 3,000 years worth of data, yeah, in terms of plans, sections, elevations, photographs, you name it. So this is a gigantic repository of disciplinary knowledge that is on our fingertip, basically. What would be, is it possible, this is a speculative question now, is it possible to take that disciplinary knowledge and use a neural network to generate new solutions? And I'm really speaking about new solutions out of that data set. It's of course a question of what are you asking the AI to do? It's not a general thing that can be done like that, but as a possibility, what does the disciplinary wealth that we have play in a universe where AI is at play?
I mean, that's something maybe that Daniel has addressed in some of his.
Can you repeat the question? I was engaging here in the chat. Sorry.
What role or what value does the collected disciplinary knowledge in architecture in form of a database have when you're trying to generate new architectural solutions out of that? Is it possible?
It might be possible, but not if it's just understood at the level of I'm just collecting a data set and I'm just based on that data set I'm outputting something. I think could be relevant if you have an entire like super elaborate process of not only sorting the data set but also
include the semantic information. You mean?
Yeah, including semantic information, and then maybe your own interpretations of certain things or certain ways that you you understand that the network should, in a way, learn the representation of that data. Yeah, I think if we just apply just a random algorithm that we find out there and we just put it on a big data set, I think it's meaningless then. Yeah, but if we start to engage in a sort of process of, we look at all the examples, and the same way that we as architects, we always do this kind of process of analysis. We are analyzing certain aspects from history, and then suddenly, that analysis leads to something super novel as an idea, that we come up with. Yeah. And I imagine something similar also here. It's just going to be that it's something on steroids. Yeah. Something that it's X times, what we did before. And there it's also, of course, more potential in a way to actually really go to the core of some problems and ideas that you can find in history, but I think that should be something that we deal with very carefully and have this kind of very clear process behind what we are doing and how we segment semantically the data, then how we sort certain things, how we structure the network, the learning process, and so on.
I think I have to be a bit more specific. I agree that my question was maybe a little bit too general, like just saying everything. Of course, it's true that you have to be more specific, like which kind of program is it? Does it include the semantic information? Do you use an unsupervised learning process so that it understands finally also what's a toilet? That's something maybe for Kostas, because we can do that. And there's like a variety of other things where you have to be more precise in that. But what I'm trying to get to here is rather the question. Let's, for example, take the postmodern approach to using historical precedents, where you have basically, you use historical examples in order to generate something new, but is rather like a quote or something historic. And what I'm trying to say here is that the good thing about using neural networks in a similar vein is that it's not necessarily going to recreate the historic example. I'm going here to the point where I think Kostas also mentioned that at a point that basically, of course, AIs can replicate, for example, the artwork of others and look exactly like it would be by that person. Coming to this example that you showed about the Chinese artists in, I forgot the city, that basically can copy everything, right? The good thing about AI is that you can do basically both. At the end of the day, AI is just glorified curve fitting. So if it comes close to the curve that you give it as a specific criteria, it's going to imitate that specific style very precisely. And we've seen this, for example, on the website, This Person Does Not Exist, where it generates images of persons that do not exist that look realistic and convincing. And that's because it's perfectly aligned to that curve. Once we start to move away from that curve, though, things start to change. They start to become a little bit different, still familiar, but different. So your example of the painting of Obvious, they could probably train their data set to do a perfect stylistic imitation of a Dutch 17th century portrait, but that's not their goal. They actually programmed their neural network sloppy, so to speak, and that sloppiness basically creates something that is different, new, and provoking to us as humans, and also provoking to people who are aware of that kind of art. Yeah. So this being said, this is what I would say is the argument between using historic data like it was done through the, let's say, postmodern era of architectural design, and using historic data in our current condition where we can use it to generate something that is different. Not necessarily a quote, not necessarily funny, but and so on, but it's still somehow recognizable. A good example is Deep Himmelblau, the image that you see behind Daniel Bolohan, that is based on Deep Himmelblau's database of images. It's still recognizable as sort of a Deep Himmelblau project, but it's not an existing project. It does not exist. Yeah, and that potential is, I think, extremely valuable in terms of pushing forward sensibilities, whether artistic, architectural, musical, writing, poetry, and so on, to push for a very interesting sensibility that I describe it as post-human sensibility because it's not entirely created by humans, but it entails elements of human creativity or human artistic production rather than creativity, I would say.
Let me just throw something in there. I think Kostas was talking about a kind of different logic entirely. I mean, in law, there are two kind of principles. One is a law based on precedent, which is what English law is based on. And then there's also, I think, European law is based more on kind of principles. And I think it seemed to me that Costas was working through a possibility of principles, and therefore there could be many other solutions we haven't thought about so far, which I think makes a lot of sense in some ways. The key question to my mind really is the fact that we have to be able to recognize it as being creative. It's something we've discussed a lot in the past. But I'm just wondering in some ways, so what often happens is that, for example, the AlphaGo has changed the way in which Go has been played. I'm just wondering whether that kind of perception about how we treat art as something being recognizably art might be destabilized by some of the possibilities afforded by AI generated art. But maybe I could just invite Costas to comment on the question about precedence.
I think Matthias is right. I think the problem with the current state of AI is that it's not really that creative. It's more like it's a passive system. The neural networks are made in a way that they can recognize things. What we call common sense, but they're not creative in the sense that making decisions of their own. And the whole point that I was trying to make was this idea of intentionality. The whole idea of being creative is to come up with something, an idea, something that was not there. When you're passive, which is what a neural network is, it's hard to come up with some new idea because you're basically passive. You're looking, you can recognize somebody. Yes, I can abuse you, which is more like what the deep dreams are. So you actually are hallucinated to something, but it's not creative in the sense of the emergent idea out of something. And I think that is a little bit of a problem to me in the current state of what AI is, because we're looking and we're expecting and we're hoping to see something creative, and we don't see it because the system doesn't allow it to happen because of the way that it's designed. I would think that more chances of true AI, true in the sense of creative for the fields of design, would be found in cellular automata, sort of like types of emergent, if you like, behavior, because there you have something you don't expect. The system itself is producing a new behavior. And that, to me, is intention. It's the seeds of intentionality that could actually make something happen that is not expected from the user that created it, which is what intelligent is supposed to be. I mean, take, for example, a kid. I mean, do you know if a kid is dumb or smart by looking at it? No. You have to ask the questions. If you ask it, do you recognize your mother? The kid will say, yeah. That doesn't make it intelligent. Just because it recognizes his mother, I can see the mother, any dumb kid can recognize his mother. But a kid who is smart is somebody who is going to make some comment or is going to take something that exists and change it in a certain way. And the problem is the neural networks, the way they're right now, are passive. They're just pattern recognition systems. And I don't think that has any high potential for creativity. But so I expect soon to start looking into different either modifications of neural network or some sort of a cellular automata style of emergent behavior that would actually be, in my mind, more promising. I think that's what I think.
Costas, can I just bounce something off you? One of the points that was made by Theodoros a few weeks ago was that maybe AlphaGo wasn't actually being creative. I mean, your formulation for creativity is that which you don't expect. Now, maybe that points towards limitations of humans, because I don't think that AlphaGo was being creative at all. I think it was just coming up with a novel solution that we hadn't expected. Now, if you put it on those grounds, can we even talk about human creativity? Is it simply based on just things we hadn't thought about before? I mean, your argument actually is quite persuasive, and I think it could even challenge that notion of creativity itself.
Well, I think the AlphaGo case is interesting because it really did something that was not expected, because it made a gap between something that was potentially possible, but nobody ever thought about it. Because in a way it did a permutation, in a way. It just went through many, many possibilities, one of which was dismissed by a human, and therefore it was surprising to see that it happened. The same thing happens many times with Google Maps. Like there are many cases where it hides things. I mean, in a sense of hiding as in not necessarily trying to deceive you, but it found that this is the best optimum way to do something. But this is all results of something. It's the neural network that actually is going into the real world. And because it has this multiplicity of possibilities of searching through many, many, many possibilities, it finds something that was dismissed or not understood by a human, and we think of it when we see it, oh, how did it figure it out? It didn't. It just found it in a vast amount of possible permutations, one of which was the one that we missed ourselves. So it's basically not how it made the mood, it's how we missed that mood. Because the system, like I said before, is not active. It's a passive system. So it cannot actually make a smart move because it doesn't have anything emergent into it. But it can find into the world things that are emergent in the sense that we missed it. So that sense of thing, the AlphaGo example is more of us, a problem with us, not with the intelligence of the system. We were not that smart enough.
Well, let me just throw something back at you that I mentioned the other day. We had a Digital Futures question on the death session on the death of culture. The fact we missed it. Now, let me just put to you the fact that the supposition that I made before. There's no such thing as magic. There is no such thing as magic. When the magician pulls the rabbit out of the hat, it's not actually magic. What we're seeing is we can't see the process, and therefore we attribute it to magic. We're saying, oh, that's magic, but it's not magical at all. Could not the same be said of creativity? It's kind of creativity is something that has an aura to it. Wow, amazing, creative. But is it simply because we hadn't recognized the possibility of things, and therefore could we even dismiss the notion of creativity as being a bit like magic, as being, we think it's creative, we think it's magical, but maybe it's not.
Right. I mean, the whole idea of random production, I mean, the cellular automata, exactly, that's what it is. It's a random sort of like a set of rules out of which somehow aligns into something and produce something that we never expect. Like if you put the rules in a certain way, you make something that it was not expected by the system. Okay, and that is embedded into the system itself, which is different from seeing something outside into the world and saying like, oh, I missed that. Like I said before, it's almost like a matter of like observing something versus making up something, which is more like intelligent in a way. So I agree with you. Yeah, this is true, and that is, I mean, again, but to us, to me, is the creative side that I'm interested in. I'm not interested in recognizing yet another pattern. I mean, that's probably very interesting for you getting into an airport gate so you don't miss your flight, but that's not intelligent. Well, it's not creative. Let's put it this way. I don't see any creativity there. I may see creativity in the coding, the code, the tool making of it. That is creative to me, but not the actual neural network that takes over the process. So I think the creativity is far away right now, but again, it's not, I mean, it's far and yet it's close. I mean, a lot of things are happening and a lot of things will be happening. And I think, I don't know if a 30 or 40 year is a good estimate. I think it'd be much shorter. Again, when we say 40 and 50, it embeds into it this sort of like relief that, oh, it's not going to be in my time, so okay, I don't have to worry about it. But I don't think that's a good way of looking at it. I think we should think that's going to happen tomorrow, and even if it's not going to happen, or yesterday. So in that sense, we're much more ready, and also we could be actually alert on the fact that we should be the ones who actually should take over that, or we should actually be the ones who actually, why not? We should be the ones who could make that creative tool, because how can the non-creative people make creative tools? We have something in our discipline, architecture, design, art, or whatever, that is creative. We know what creativity is. The computer science people or whatever, the people who are not in the creative fields, they don't know what it is. And yet these are the ones who are supposed to be responsible for making these systems. So somehow we are missing the opportunity, or we are dismissing it, or we are kind of like a calm about not believing that it's going to happen soon. But I think we shouldn't. We should be alert about it, and we should actually make, and we should be actually brave enough to make the tool. I don't think it's that difficult at the end of the day. If you look at a neural network, it's not that complicated. Any architect could have made it back in the 1950s. Even today, it's an easy thing. It's just a bunch of networks. We're doing all the time. If you look what a bubble diagram is, that is a neural network. But we never think about it that way because we miss that sort of like connection. And yet, we are the only ones who can do that. And that's probably why we don't have creative neural networks, because they were made by people who are not creative in the first place. We are the ones, we have to put the discipline back into the field in order to save the world from the murder.
Well, maybe
or the death.
Let me discuss it. But maybe I mean, we're the creative ones. We think we're creative. Let me just put that to you, because that was precisely the comment that Lisa Doll made. Moves that we thought were creative. It's what we think is creative, but is it creative?
But
Well, maybe in that case it was, but we are creative. Yeah, of course. We are the ones who define creativity. By definition, we are creative, whether we like it or not. But that doesn't mean that we have to expect from them to accept it. We are the one who make all these creative decisions.
Well, we think we're creative. Yeah.
Relative to your question earlier, Neil, about if creativity really exists, and also picking up on Kostas' comment, if we look at it historically, creativity should decrease, right? Because, you know, when nothing exists and suddenly the man made something, then it's something special. And so as the design space starts getting saturated with solutions, there is theoretically, at least fewer and fewer, you know, possible outcomes which would make sense within our own frame of reference, right? At the same time, if you think about it, the fact that we have so much feedback now would be an extreme assistance and enhancement of our ability to become even more creative. So there is a kind of paradox there, because theoretically it becomes more difficult for real creativity to exist today, since so much has been already made. But on the other hand, because so much has been already achieved, that would make it at the same time easier. So again, obviously it's more of a philosophical question, because we are the ones who define it. But I don't know, it just kind of got me thinking with regards to, you know, whether it really exists, and if it does, in what way does it make sense? And I completely agree with Kostas that we completely try to disengage between human and computational creativity, but computational creativity would depend on human creativity. Otherwise, you know, those kind of neural networks will never be refined in a way that, you know, we could describe them as creative, you know, within design at least.
Maybe if I can add a short comment to that. It's a great observation, both from Kostas and Manos. I would like actually to maybe spend a second or so on Margaret Boden. I think that we have discussed her several times in this frame. And I think she sometimes is helpful in defining the conversation. I'm not saying that she has the most advanced theory about AI creativity, but I think it helps for us to define and explore it further. And in her book, basically, she describes creativity as having three specific features, which is it's novel, it's unusual, and it's surprising. Yeah. And if we take that as the frame of conversation, I would say that, for example, the move 37 from AlphaGo was creative because it was novel, it was unusual, and it was surprising. Yeah. Maybe the only point where I would start to wiggle around is the question of novelty, because that move in some way exists. Yeah. Within the frame of what kind of moves you can do on the board of Go. Even if Go has the number of atoms in the universe as possible moves, it still exists, that move. Yeah. Now, in another aspect that she describes about creativity, specifically and I think she describes this both as being human creativity as well as AI creativity, is that she differentiates between combinatorial and exploratory creativity as being two specific areas to consider once you're describing and talking about creativity. So the way how you put things, and we discussed this before, you can either take things from history and put them together, mash them together and do something new. That might be a combinatorial creative process versus an exploratory one, which I would assume, for example, when an architect sits down with a pen and starts doodling around on his paper, he's exploring the space of design, I would say. There is not a specific solution in the mind of the architect at that point. He's exploring the possibilities. Yeah. And maybe to finalize basically that whole conversation, maybe some points on intentionality, because I think also that's a very important conversation to have, especially when we're talking about AI. And the weird history of the concept of intentionality, by the way, because it basically went through a whole phase in the Middle Ages where the whole discussion was about God, like the intentions of God, the intentionality of God, etc., etc. Like this was the whole philosophical conversation in the Middle Ages. Then in the 19th, early 20th century, people like Franz Brentano, Edmund Husserl, and so on, they picked up the term intentionality and made it part basically of their phenomenological conversation. Yeah, where there was the conversation about mental states, perception, beliefs, yeah, all these sort of things, desires being part of that intentionality, ideas on intentionality. The question is whether AIs can have this kind of conversations at all at the moment. I personally doubt it. Yeah, so there's that part. The other one being the intentionality of aspects in machine learning, for example, in cars, and this is where we come back actually to Costa's example of Tesla and the car, like the intentionality of that machine learning process. Yeah, is there intentionality? Did he want to drive over that biker? I don't think so. So there's like a whole set of things that are complicated to discuss. And to Costas's point about us architects doing diagrams and all these sort of things and having been done this forever and not discussing that in AI, I'm not entirely sure about that, because actually Moni Wright-Stinson's book, Architectural Intelligence, very specifically makes a claim to that kind of development in the architectural discipline, citing examples like Christopher Alexander, specifically, which I think is a good example for that. And then Cedric Price and Wurman for more computational processes, but I would say the example of Christopher Alexander is a good example to understand that that sort of thinking in architecture has been present. Maybe it was not that much appreciated by the discipline. That's another problem.
Matthias, can I just chip something in here just to to take two of your arguments? I mean, the problem about Margaret Bowden, I mean, much as I respect her, I think her view is completely wrong. I mean, partly, and this is a point that Arthur Miller makes, is that she's judging on the outcome. Actually, it's about the creative is about a process, and I think therefore that's where the intentionality comes in. So I really think we need to go and revise that Margaret Bowden's view. I mean, much as I respect her, it seems to be old-fashioned in many ways.
That is totally fine. I was not here to defend Margaret Bowden. I just wanted to have exactly the conversation we're having now.
Yeah.
Right. But Matthias, I agree with you. But the problem with Bowden or any Bowden is that it's a circular, synonymous argument. Because you're saying intentionality is human, and then you say that human is to be intentional. You're asking a human what is intentional, and they say like it's to be human. And then you ask, okay, what is human? Because it's the person who can be intentional. So basically, the circular argument, it goes all the way around because we're talking about a human to a human. But we don't need to talk about a human. There is already an argument that is made today about a machine telling me who I am. And it says, if it can think of me, then I exist. That is an argument to be because it didn't come from a human. It came from a machine who made a sentence that is telling me something about myself. Now I would like to hear that argument. But Bowden, or whoever Bowden is talking about people, yeah, okay. Within that world, everybody agrees with one another. It doesn't make me interested at all. I'm interested in something that comes from the alien world, somewhere from outside, and is talking to me and is whispering to my ear, you know what? I exist too. Can we talk together? Okay.
But one does not dismiss the other, Costas.
No, it doesn't. But at the same time, we're getting into we can talk forever ad nauseum about what we are intentionally as humans. Yeah. But can you give me an example where a human is not, there's an intention without a human? Then I'll be interested in that. Find me one example where intention has been made and there's no human in it, like the knife case, a knife that actually has a mind of its own. Then I'll be interested in talking about it. But people who murder with knives, there are thousands of stories.
Well, I think we're here actually at Manuel de Landa's potentiality argument about the knife. Like you can kill somebody with a knife, or it just can be in the drawer. So.
Right, but if there is a human agent behind it, that's the whole point. We want to see somewhere where an argument has been made that is not human, a painting has been made that is not human, a murder has been made that is not human, anything. Just give me one example that is no human involved in it, then I'll be interested.
I'm with you. I mean, I'm highly interested in the problem of agency in this sort of post-human design environment. It's a super interesting topic to have. And the more I explore it, the more I figure out that no, ultimately a human has his hand in that, in one way or the other. As automated as the processes sometimes seem.
automation is the lack of human. So in a sense,
Automation is triggered by humans.
Well, not really, not always. You can have automation that is out of control, or you can have a lot of things that happen in the world of automation that is not predictable. And in that sense,
I was not talking about control.
I call that. But control is intentionality, and it's ownership, and that's the whole point.
When
so
you
the moment
dream,
you lose intentionality.
Okay,
control,
Kostas, when you dream,
in charge of the system. Yeah.
When you dream, do you think you have you are intentionally dreaming something?
You mean when I dream? No, I mean it's a human creation. Yeah, fine.
No, but I'm just not talking about creation. I'm talking about intentionality. Are you intentionally dreaming about something?
I mean, this just to pick up on this. I think this is a very good point, Matthias. I mean, I think the assumption's been that human beings, you can only be creative. This is a comment that's also been made by Melody Mitchell. You can only be creative if you're aware that you're being creative. Therefore, you have to be conscious to be creative. But the problem is that much of what we generate, neuroscientists tell us, we're not even aware we're generating. So consciousness is not totally pervasive. Sometimes that light bulb moment when something comes up, is that not something afterwards you say, oh, that was a smart idea, but is that something we're conscious about ourselves?
And most of the time, like, we are more creative where we are not conscious about something. Like, more creative ideas come out of that. Yeah.
There's a reason why it's called. Sorry.
We're getting into a circular argument again. Sorry.
There's a reason why it's called, for example, deep dreaming, or why we're talking about hallucination in this whole AI universe, because there's these sort of aspects within the work, which means that we understand enough of these processes to translate them to a mathematical formula that allows us to apply that as an algorithm. So the dreaming, hallucinating part of it is not completely to be dismissed. I think this is an interesting problem because it also actually produces sometimes these sort of psychedelic results that are highly interesting. Whether they're creative is a completely different question, but they can make other people creative. They can make me creative because I see them. Yeah, and I am the whole point of inspiration, for example, we didn't discuss today, which is another like big can of worms that we're not going to open up in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, just say I think Alexa throws a spanner in the works. I mean, you've got a great colleague there, Matthias, Alexa Carlson. I mean, she's kind of saying that, basically we've got to be careful with the terminology we use. Okay, I mean, when we say learning, do we mean the same thing? Do machines learn as humans do? Is creative the same thing? Is intelligence even the same term? All these terms that we're using, are they mean the same? Do they have the same precise meaning? And I don't think they do. It's so therefore, dreaming and hallucinations, they're the same term in English, but really, are they the same in different contexts?
I just wanted to know that the notion of perception and consciousness. I know this can be a completely different discussion, but just to point, there have been so many different theories from people at different times, and one of them by Julian Jaynes places the origin of consciousness in ancient Greece. And using the example of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and the voices of the gods that the people within the story were supposed to hear. And the theory behind it is that at some point there was what he calls the breakdown of the bicameral mind. So the two different chambers of the brain at some point kind of collapsed, and it was unified. And so people started realizing that what they thought were hearing was not this kind of supernatural, divine kind of word, but rather their own thoughts. Of course, this has been challenged by other scientists, and I think psychiatrist Dr. McGilchrist, he's talking about the complete opposite, which happened. That at that moment it was the split within the hemispheres that allowed them to perceive, or change the way that they perceive the world. So anyway, I just wanted to the point here being that it's up to it's the people's own interpretation of how we define consciousness and how how kind of subtle that is.
Do we have any further comments? We want to wrap up fairly soon. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a few comments here, just last comments. When it comes to this kind of process, so for me, it's like I'm always engaging in this kind of how you have multiple networks interacting, yeah, because that's in a way for me to try to strive for something that is more creative than just a network, like Kostas is describing it as a sort of passive neural network. And the hope is there, like if you have multiple AI agents that interact, then probably that gives in a way room for more creativity to emerge out of that, yeah, than just a passive system. But I think here it's also something, I know these are different approaches, yeah, but for me, for example, curve fitting is something extremely important, yeah. But curve fitting in the sense of only a specific design task, like a discrete design task, not the overall design, yeah. If you talk about overall design and curve fitting, then probably you're talking about the sort of modernist kind of approach to things, yeah. But here, then curve fitting for me, it's very important because I'm interested in a way, we are finally dealing with not with expert systems, but with learning systems. So you finally have a tool in your tool set that can learn. It's not anymore this kind of passive parametric model kind of thing, parametric, yeah, or other kind of models that we had before. So then for me, it's always this kind of question, like, is that tool actually learning the things correctly? That's why the curve fitting it's important for me, not discrete design task, for example, yeah. Because if it's not learning, then what exactly do I have here? We have, we were discussing about this before, we have the Chinese room problem again, yeah? So we don't have actually a tool that actually learns to speak Chinese. We just have a tool that is able to follow a set of rules to translate into Chinese, yeah? So I think the real potential comes into place where you start to have this kind of AIs that are actually really learning in the true sense of the word, yeah? And then when you apply them in chains or this kind of networks, almost like a swarm of AI agents, then I think you start to think about emergent, you know, creativity, something that is really truly novel and is not bounded in a way to either the data set or the kind of structure that the neural network has, yeah? And then the other point that I wanted to make is this is something that I was keep stressing, like also when I was discussing with Neil about this, and it's great that Kostas also mentioned this. We as architects, we have to take that position of we have to develop those networks. Yeah, we cannot expect in a way computer science to give us in a way the tool that define what creativity is understood in architecture, or what or how exactly creativity or how exactly a certain network has to operate in architecture. I think we have to be the ones that actually push that part, and we have to be more engaged in that part.
Let me try and maybe sort of wrap things up. This has been fantastic. I really want to thank Kostas. I mean, one thing I'd say, Kostas, I disagree on etymology, but one thing I must acknowledge is, you know, that I studied ancient Greek at school, right? I in the ancient Greek, I read it all, right? And it was, I mean, I think what's so special is that some of you the ancient Greeks some of the concepts that we have in, let's say, psychoanalysis, all those terms came from Greece, you know, from eros, thanatos, and whatever else. It's all kind of Greek concepts and things. And what I really appreciate about Kostas's way of thinking is that he's on top of the technology, but also has this deeply philosophical outlook, which I really appreciate. And it's great to have also Manos and Theodoros as well, which is good to have. I want to thank everyone for their contributions, not just today, but over the course of this particular course, the 12 sessions that we've had. And I want to just kind of finally kind of finish off by talking about what we mentioned at the very beginning. That is to say, that what we've been discussing. The next step is going to be a platform that we're going to have on in June, from the 12th to the 24th of June, where we're going to take this thing, the platform that's allowed us to communicate in an amazing way. We've had Kostas in Shanghai, we've got Manos in Greece, we've got Theodoros in Kuala Lumpur, and so on and so on. It's been an incredible platform for debating ideas, and I think it's actually manifest a form of creativity in itself, I think, in terms of the kind of discussions we've got. But we're going to move forward, and the next step is going to be this platform where we're going to be inviting Akim Menges, Philippe Bloch, and so on, for a discussion about the tools and generative performative design, but also philosophical discussions. I'm hoping to bring in Manuel de Landa and hopefully Sanford Quinter and a few others to discuss some of these questions. And I'm also hoping to maybe get Judith Butler and a few female voices as well. Let's see, try and keep it equal. But that's going to happen then, and hopefully we can build upon that, but that's going to be an incredible possibility in stretching out and reaching and sharing these ideas across the world, which is precisely the notion about inclusive futures. We can be able to share things. They'll be followed by some workshops and also the conference. I just want to sort of once reiterate that the call for papers are there. It's a free conference and it's a highly rated publication. And I also kind of want to mention that in terms of the discussions we've been having, all of these discussions are on Bilibili. This is the Bilibili site where all the videos have been uploaded. If you want to do a screenshot, because it's a lot difficult to capture all that. And also, if you go to the site where you can, all these YouTube discussions are referred to, the YouTube channel, they're all there too. So this is, in a sense, it's the end of a 12-week course and a discussion, a debate, I don't know what you call it, which has been incredibly productive and a really interesting kind of prototype for something else, hopefully in the future. The next step is the Digital Consortium doctoral platform, and hopefully much beyond that. So I just want to thank you again. It's been an incredible session today, really interesting. But it's not the end of everything. It's just the beginning of something else. So I look forward to seeing you all hopefully in June and to be part of this. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.